Welcome to the 8th episode of Drams and Dragons. My name is Gus Berger, and with me is my co-host Dustin Van Horn. How are you doing tonight, man?
Hey Gus, I'm great. A little tired. Can't complain. Yeah, be better if I had some whiskey tonight, but I'm drinking dandelion root tea. I think what we wanted to talk about today was our origins in fantasy, like why we're into it. Because not everybody is. Some people, people have their genres that they like, and you can't help but separate like where you go and what you like and where you grew up and your experiences from what you do and what your interests are. So I was wondering, Gus, what like in your background can you think of in terms of like your origins, like why you're into fantasy?
I couldn't say why. I could tell you exactly what the first fantasy book that I read was.
Ooh, what is it?
The Redwall series.
Oh yeah,
The first book that I read was
the rodents.
Mossflower.
Okay.
In grade school, I'd spent a lot of time in the school library, reading a lot of, fairly mundane sort of kids' first book, like kids' first novel, like type stuff. Like there were sports books, like sports novels. There was I read a little bit of like the Hardy Boys.
Oh yeah.
I was always like looking for things to read. I remember I had a friend who was very much into fantasy, and I wasn't super into fantasy or anything at the time. And he and I were good friends and we hung out a lot. We spent a lot of time, playing at school and at recess and stuff. And he was like, you should read this book. And that book being Redwall. I absolutely just completely fell in love with Mossflower. And so then I read the rest of the other books that were out. So at the time there were 3 books out, Mossflower, Redwall, and then Matameo. And I'd have a friend. The reason I read them in that order was because a buddy of mine was like, well, you can't read them. You can't read them in the order they were published.
Oh, right.
You have to read them in the chronological order. And we're all like little kids. And of course, I'm like, ooh, the chronological order.
That's
This sounds
fantastic.
good. Yeah. I mean, we're like little kids. We have no idea what we're talking about at all.
Yeah.
He's like, ooh, you have to read this chronologically. So I did. I took his advice. But I was hooked. The first book was amazing. And I actually still think Mossflower's like the best book in that series that I've ever read. And I haven't read the whole series. At some point I got too old for it. And I got,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly how many I read, but it was a fair number. Maybe
Yeah.
half the series. He published like 20 of them
There's so many.
before he passed away. He
Yeah.
published a lot.
Is it Brian Jacques?
Yeah, Brian Jacques.
Jacques. But it's French, so there's the weird
I don't
ES.
know if you pronounce the S actually.
I don't think you do.
Jacques. I don't think you do.
Jacques.
But
Nah,
he's
it doesn't
not.
sound right.
He's English though, right? So
Nah.
Brian Jacques. Brian Jacques. I don't know.
He's from New England. Brian Jacks. Brian Jacks.
Brian Jacques.
Jack. Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah,
Right on.
Redwall was the first series that like really pulled me in.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Cool.
as far as my story with fantasy, it was like, the first hit is kind of like free. I got it from the school library. It was like,
Yeah.
it was sort of, hey kid, here, try some of this. And I read that whole series, and then I was sort of like, well, what do I try next? And then there were a lot of The Hobbit popped up soon after that. So I read The Hobbit, which I loved. Obviously it's beloved by so many people. I loved it when I first read it. It was one of my favorite things that I ever read. And it was like, I have to have
No
more.
kidding.
Yeah. As a kid.
Man.
Yeah. Reading The Hobbit. And, it took me, I didn't immediately read Lord of the Rings. Somebody advised me it was more advanced and more. And so it was a few more years before I actually read Lord of the Rings, but I read The Hobbit. I didn't understand all of it. I think it was probably still a little advanced for me at the time. But then I had the same friend got me into Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, okay, cool.
My dad went out and got me, because I was getting into this, he went out and got me that Dungeons and Dragons starter set. It was like a box.
Like
It
one with the red
had
dragon on it, like the third edition kind of thing.
no, it was it. This was before. This was not. I mean, it wasn't before Advanced Dungeons. This was not an Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. This was like a
Oh,
beginners or basic.
old school, as they say.
Yeah, this is from the '90s, the 1991 revision. My dad got it for me, and I just started DMing for my friends
Hmm.
after I got that. I think like the following Christmas, I got like the Dungeons and Dragons rules cyclopedia,
Hmm.
which is like a big, rule book. It's not AD&D, it's still Dungeons and Dragons. Like there's so many editions, right? And so many versions and so many things and the rules cyclopedia was like the complete rule set for that version. Later I'd get into reading the, Dungeons and Dragons like novels. That's the Dragonlance books.
Those were
Dragons
everywhere
of
for a while.
yeah, and then the
Yeah.
Drizzt books and like I got
Yeah.
super into that stuff. The one of the ones that, and this is all still while I'm in elementary school. I got very into reading these series. I read the Dark Sun series, the Prism
Yeah.
Pentad. The Prism
Yeah.
Pentad's still one of my favorite sort of obscure fantasy series, and it's funny because it's like it's a spin-off like book series in support of like D&D products.
Yeah.
It's still really good.
It still holds up, huh?
It's still pretty good. Yeah, so I got kind of into the D&D thing after Mossflower, after The Hobbit.
Okay.
um
So you had a really robust like 80s, I mean, I don't know if 80s was Raymond Nephi. It's like the 90s was
for me
really,
it was in the early 90s, right? So
there's really start. There's so much to read back then.
yeah, and it was a lot coming out. I mean, a lot of these D&D series were actively, publishing, and they were sort of in their heyday even. Like,
Yeah.
and so then I read like that's when I started reading more mature, more serious fantasy. Was sort of sixth grade on. I know I got into obviously I read Lord of the Rings, and then I got into Wheel of Time.
So wait a minute, wait a minute. So all this happened before sixth grade. So this is just grade school, reading The Hobbit and all the Brian Jacques stuff. Like,
Yeah, Wheel of Time was in seventh grade.
okay,
So all the rest of that was in sixth grade.
gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotta say, like, especially compared to my origin kind of stories with it, you started off pretty young with that. I didn't even look at The Hobbit until I was like 15 or 16, and by that time I was like, what is this baby stuff? Hobbit, all these
Yeah.
rhymes and songs and
Yeah. So the thing is that my dad was extremely supportive of my reading.
cool.
I mean, both my parents were to varying extents, but my dad especially.
Makes sense with
You
your
know,
family background,
yeah, my parents got divorced when I was in grade school. Maybe maybe if I was a psychiatrist, I would find some connection between between fantasy worlds and like trying to
Ooh.
escape from reality. And I don't know, but my dad was extremely supportive of my reading.
Mhm.
There were virtually no limits put on what he would get for me. We went to the bookstore once, twice a week,
Mhm.
uh, or maybe once. We probably averaged like once a week. We would drive down to started out as like the local bookstore, and then Barnes and Noble opened up nearby, and we would drive down, and he would basically just be like, "What? Pick out a book."
Cool.
And he basically put no limit. If I could read the book, he would buy it. Like if I was
Ah,
capable, there was no limit in terms of like, oh, that looks way too mature and serious for you, kiddo. There was none of that. It was, and I'm not like I was going out and picking like, Conan or
oh
like,
God.
you know, really sort of like pulpy, like which
Yeah.
I love Conan now, but like, yeah, it wasn't like I was going out and picking like pulpy sort of lurid or like horror-y stuff. I was picking, you know, Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings and
Yeah.
D&D novels and, you
Yeah.
know,
It's funny you mentioned that because so much of my history was that definitely escapism and also the ability to I don't know. I'm getting nostalgic, and also I'm really glad we're not still in the 90s because this is before Amazon could just mail you whatever book you wanted. So
mhm.
going to the bookstore, yeah, that's just what you did with like your kids. And yeah, we went all. I was a Borders guy myself. Love Borders.
Yeah, Borders are great.
Yeah, I preferred it too. I was sad they were the ones that went under. Actually, no offense if any of.
Well, like I actually agree. I preferred Borders, but it was just
Yeah,
the one that opened up the nearest to us was a Barnes and
Barnes and
Noble, so it
Noble.
was where we went.
Yeah, but no, that's cool. With having the kind of unrestricted access, you're not going to the not getting anything kind of out of the norms. That's what kind of drew me to fantasy in the first place. I grew up in a little more of like a conservative house. They were very kind of wanting me not to have a lot of influence, especially like strong sexual kind of things or bad language and things like that. And so
Hmm.
fantasy was like a cool way for me to kind of under the radar get different experiences and when I went and I had a book and I was like, "Hey mom, can I get this cool book?" She wasn't gonna read it and she didn't know that there was stuff going on in there. And hi mom, if you're listening. But it was actually really good for me to read about these like real, at least they felt real, like human interactions in a different context than I was used to. Um, and yeah, I think we usually, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and they had like thrift stores, man. It's like a thrift store city. And
Hmm.
they have these massive libraries of used books and all of them. And so that's what we do on the weekends, man. There's a place called Bookman's in Tucson. It's amazing, dude. Just this gigantic, like, it's just like a gigantic bookstore. They have all kinds of cool stuff. They have records and they have just cool old stuff to look at all the time. And man, I found some like weird old stuff from the 70s and the 60s that I got to read. And that's
Yeah,
kind of my first
we had half price books here.
half price
That
books.
was
Yeah. So I started off kind of in the same way you did, like think like Raymond E. Feist and like Anne McCaffrey, like that type, like Dragon Riders of Pern and all those.
mm,
But there
yeah.
was one I was trying to find it. All I remember it was the cover's got a guy and he's got a staff and it's like a bird thing where they can either turn into birds. And there's a real cool magic system, but if I find it here, I will say something. But basically it was the first time where when I read it, there was like a clear, like a magic system involved and lore
Yeah.
that I could kind of grasp onto and really go like, oh, and wonder about and think about and kind of lose myself in. And it's an interesting age too, like the middle school age, because the way your brain works and the way your imagination works, it's almost like a fan fiction creator where you can kind of, at least this is how I was when I was a kid. I'd go to sleep at night thinking about the book and thinking about the characters in a way that was very real in my
Hmm.
head. And that was the first book that kind of hooked me like that. And it's right on the tip of my brain. If I find it here, I'll say what it is. Um, but then the obvious one I think that really started changing my life and made a big difference was probably the Wheel of Time. Like that just ate my life for a while. Because I think by the time I discovered it, we were up to like book 8 or book 9, and
Yeah.
just massive books. And so it kept me busy for months just reading through them.
Yeah.
But
Like when I started Wheel of Time, because I would say for me, like in terms of my fantasy reading taste and in terms of my fantasy, sort of my understanding of fantasy, I would definitely say that there is like this pre and post Wheel of Time. Like it changed how I viewed the genre and changed how I viewed it, storytelling, and it changed. I mean, and this is as a reader, and I read a ton of stuff. I mean, I left out a lot. You mentioned Anne McCaffrey, right?
Hmm.
The Dragon Rise of Praying. Ursula K. Le Guin, right?
Yeah.
Like the Earthsea series, series that those books. And there's so many more that are my brain's just like completely like David Eddings was an author that I read.
Oh yeah. I was gonna mention him. He had a long
You know
series, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Terry Pratchett,
Hmm.
you know Terry Goodkind,
Oh God, don't get me started on that.
and I don't love all of those, but there was a lot that I read. But there's definitely, in at least in my reading and understanding of fantasy, and there's definitely, I think that more than any of these other series, even more than Tolkien, they're at least for me as a sort of the way that I sort of viewed writing and matured as a reader. Wheel of Time is like yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like that. It's like a moment, right, where like everything kind of changes. Yeah, paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Well,
Um,
I know what you mean though. Because, and if you get into the background of the book, it's fascinating because I think, and I think it's from what he said in interviews, like it's basically him. It's a coming of age story. It's got a lot of the tropes and all that, but it's a lot of it. It's this guy's experience as a person in combat. What he was deployed to Vietnam War. I think he's a Vietnam War guy.
yeah,
So a lot of this is, we're talking loss of innocence and just that whole experience and something about it, man. It just gets that young kid brain going and go, oh, the world's a bigger place than I thought it was.
yeah,
And he does that brilliant thing too. It still sticks out of my mind. I mean, the book starts off 2,000 years in the past, and it has this huge epic thing happen where Lews Therin is going insane, and he creates Dragonmount, and you
yeah.
learn that the world is crumbling. And the way he writes it, it's like a falling of Rome feeling. They had it all. They had technology. They had everything, and now it's the age of legends, and it's coming to an end.
Hmm.
And that just, man, I still get goosebumps when I think about it because it was just so like it hooks you right away,
Yeah.
and then it takes you into the farm boys and the yeah. We talked. I think we mentioned it before too. Like I think maybe for both of us, like we started reading it. It's so much growth that happens in those years, so it's
Yeah.
bound to make an impression.
Yeah. And I know at least when we were like early in our friendship, like that was actually one point
Yeah,
where one sort of thing we had in common was we both loved this series. We'd found this connection, right?
yeah.
Through this book.
Yeah, it's a cool one like that. It's like a litmus test sometimes. Like if you like Wheel of Time, I think we can get along. So it's kind of like Indian foods like that too. Someone likes
Oh
Indian
God, I
food. I'm like,
kind
all
of want
right.
to go eat some Indian food now.
Oh man, I got a gift card like burning a hole
Oh
in
my
my
God.
pocket. Oh, real quick, I found the book. It was by the one the one that first kind of got is by David B. Coe, and it's called The Children of Amarid.
I have never heard of this book.
Yeah, it's like a random like thrift shop find that just
Yeah.
I'll send you a link. It was I have no idea if it stands up today, and I can't even say what it's about. It's got a very long thing, but it's just funny. I did want to mention I really wanted to talk a little bit about Terry Goodkind and the Wizard's First Rule because that actually, even though there's a lot of controversy around the author and the series, and I believe it was problematic even back in the day, but I loved it at
Yeah.
first. I remember when I read Wizard's First Law, I was laughing. It was hilarious. There was a scene in there. There's one particular scene where I felt sick to my stomach. And it was the first time reading a book that just the description got to me like that. And I thought that was a great strength of his writing. Like the way he would write things was
Yeah.
too much, which it's kind of a rare skill. It's like a Stephen King novel. Stephen King's the only guy who, for me, nails this like the entropy, like this deep human fear of death and entropy and loss of self. Like King does that really well. Stephen Goodkind, he writes like gross scenes really well. Really, like, oh, I felt ill. Like I gagged a little bit when I read it.
Mhm.
And it was all it was. He described what it felt like to basically be blown up by magic.
Yeah.
And the way he described the person there and what they felt and how they felt, it got to me. But as gross as that was, it hooked me. That was the kind of the dragon I chase now when I read fantasy. I love stuff that invokes that. And I don't necessarily go for that. Like I don't really want to be grossed out when I read.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's what I liked about fantasy and what I continue to like. It makes me feel. And when we talk about Jordan, like Robert Jordan, there's a lot of stuff in there about like being confused about girls. That was very present when I was reading it. It's like, what are these strange creatures?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that in there. There's a lot about getting out into the world and not knowing what you're doing. Like there's so much to identify with it, and the way that Robert Jordan's writing happened there. I mean, there's these scenes that stand out, like when Rand busts out of his prison box at Dumai
Mm.
Wells.
Yeah.
It's such an epic scene, and it's so well written. And the way he talks about the flag waving, like people get onto Jordan about his descriptions of colors and hems and things like that. But the way he does it makes you hear it and smell it and taste it and feel it, which is what
Mhm.
sticks in our memory, man. That's how we create memories. So I actually really value that when I read. I found it a very grounding experience to read his books at a
Yeah.
time when it was nice to be grounded. The
Mhm.
volatile years there.
Man, that scene, that Dumais Wells scene,
Mm,
it's one of those things that like sticks
yeah.
like after all these years, right? Like if they manage to pull that off even like half as well in the show
Hmm.
as it does it in the books, like it'll be spectacular. That's a like one of those special scenes. I think that when you're like, yeah, talking to somebody about fantasy, talking to somebody about Robert Jordan, if they've read Robert Jordan and you just say like Dumais Wells,
Yeah.
like it's just like you're
They
gonna have a
know.
moment. They know.
Yeah, so cathartic.
Even while you know that like what the fallout of it is gonna be terrible.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you're reading it and you're like, it's like one of those things where like all these horrible, like terrible things are falling into place, but it's still cathartic because it's like Rand is like finally free, basically, right?
Yeah.
And like he's finally getting kind of like revenge, and there's been all this buildup. I mean, because it really is kind of like revenge, right? I mean, he's like
Mhm.
against the Red Aja. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's just an incredible writing. And these are the kinds of things that, like,
Hmm.
this is why, in my mind anyway, there's like a before, there's like in my reading and my fantasy experience, there's definitely a before Robert Jordan and after Robert Jordan,
Hmm.
like, kind of divide, both in book choice, but also kind of like in what I liked and what I didn't like,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
because
Yeah.
then later on, I after Robert Jordan, oh, it wasn't that far after Robert Jordan that Game of Thrones came
Yeah.
out, the
Yep.
first
Song of
book.
Ice and Fire.
Yeah, and the first book came out in 1996. My dad gave me a copy that somebody had given to him. It's a paperback, so it was like shortly after it came out.
Hmm.
Second book still wasn't out. I remember that.
Hmm.
So God, I was a teenager. It must have been in like 97 or something like that.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I was not immediately hooked.
I can see that. No, I can
And
definitely see that. Yeah.
the reason is actually Wheel of Time, because
Hmm.
the writing of Wheel of Time, like the prose, this is just my personal opinion.
Hmm.
The prose of Wheel of Time are just so vastly superior.
Hmm.
And I know some people are going to be like, oh, I love George R. R. Martin's prose, and I don't care for them, and they're fine.
Hmm.
His storytelling's amazing.
Yeah.
And we can have a
I
whole
would agree with that. Yeah.
episode on that.
Be a whole show right there.
Yeah, maybe a whole show. But it took me a few months to actually like I started to read it like right after I got it. Like I
Hmm.
started to read it, and then like a couple months, like I stopped reading it after a couple of chapters. I was like, it's fine.
Yeah.
But there were some things about the beginning of it that like cooked in my brain.
Hmm.
And so I was like, at one point, I was like bored or something. I didn't have anything else going on. And I was like, just sitting there on my nightstand. Like, so I picked it up and I
Yeah.
started
Yeah.
reading it again. And when I got like 5 or 6 or 7 chapters in, the story starts to get its hooks,
Hmm.
right? And you kind of want to know, and it starts like clawing forward, right? And then like with
Well,
hook after hook after hook, and then you can't stop, right?
yeah,
And then you're like, where's the next one? Shit, it's not gonna be
yeah,
here for ages.
yeah, for
Although
ages.
actually at first, the first three books all came out at a regular interval.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
it
right. Yeah, they
wasn't
did.
the first three books all came out at regular intervals. And so that was sort of like, and I read them as they came out, right?
Man, that's cool. Your dad got you into that too.
And the funny thing is, he's not,
Oh, but he knew you were, huh?
yeah, he knew I was. He's not into fantasy at all. He likes a little sci-fi, I think. He will read the occasional thing, like if it's really
Hmm.
good. I sent him a while back, a couple years ago, for example, I sent him The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker.
Yeah.
He loved the first two books,
Okay.
like loved them. He is a huge reader. He just doesn't read a lot of, he reads more like historical fiction,
Okay.
mystery, stuff like those kinds of things. Like he's a
Yeah.
really real, and he'll read sci-fi. He prefers it to fantasy usually.
Hmm.
One of the things he loved back in the day was the Master and Commander books.
Oh yeah.
He's a huge fan of Master and Commander.
And who isn't? That's good stuff.
He even interviewed Patrick O'Brien,
Hmm.
the author of the Master and Commander series,
No kidding.
yeah,
Wow.
they did a whole like interview series actually. Then had a correspondence with Patrick O'Brien, but he's a really big sucker for nautical books, I think.
Oh, okay.
And so when I was like, okay, well, you got to read the Bone Ships. It was like, and I love that. I thought the third book was pretty good, but the first two books were insanely good.
Gotcha.
And so I was like, you got to read these because I thought maybe it would like the nautical thing would hook him, and it
Nautical and then
totally did. It totally
for the
did.
first two.
Like there was just the first two.
Yeah, yeah. We're kind of similar in that I don't think I got my book taste from my dad, but my dad was an integral part. Integral,
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 integral.
integral. He was really important to my development. Okay. Yeah, but his his influence was in like in gaming and with role playing.
Hmm.
And I don't know if anyone do you remember it was way back, it was called Hero Quest. And it was like,
Yeah, I
yeah,
know what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah,
dude,
yeah,
it came
yeah.
with like a DVD and you'd watch the DVD and it was like the worst like
Hmm.
early 90s special effects and like the wizard does the cast a die and
Oh my god.
but it was a guided and it was kind of like it was D&D but it was more structured. And you had like character cards and there's preset stuff, but man, he had our whole family playing that at least once or twice a week and he did Warhammer too,
Yeah.
but also nautical though. We didn't like the regular Warhammer or the sci-fi Warhammer. We did
Oh, was he?
Mana
Yeah,
War.
I remember Manowar. I never played that one, but
Dude.
the game shop that I went to regularly as a kid, there were a
Uh,
group of people who were playing that.
okay.
And
Dude, it was so much fun. We'll still play sometimes. He still has everything. And they're chilling out in our garage back in Albuquerque. And actually, the next time I have a car down there, I'm gonna try to steal a couple sets, and then maybe we can play and do a live stream.
or
Man, or it's awesome. But
maybe we
yeah,
could just live stream Hero Quest.
oh yeah, we'll play the
Oh
DVD
yeah.
too. Yes,
Oh
it's
God.
so good.
I remember the DVD. I didn't own Hero Quest when I was a kid. I had a friend who had it,
Uh,
and he had the DVD, and we never used it because it was so stupid.
it was so lame.
It was so lame.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would play that. That was a integral part of my sort of introduction into role playing games for sure.
Yeah.
It was like baby's first role playing game, kind of,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, because it's
Um,
kind of simplified. You don't have a bunch of
yeah, everything's
yeah.
streamlined. Yeah, you don't have to make your own. You're not rolling your own character. All your characters are like pre-made. And just so people know what Hero Quest is a board game that's kind of like a board game role-playing game hybrid, made by Hasbro. And it comes with little pieces. It comes with a board. It comes with little pieces. It has like
It's
and
got
both
furniture.
dungeon pieces, yeah,
Yeah,
dungeon
dungeon pieces.
pieces, furniture,
Yeah,
and
and
they
it's got
have
a
little
dungeon
in the
layout
rule book.
board. Yeah, you
Yeah,
can set it up how you
and
want.
you can either set it up completely how you want, or you can use
Like preset stuff.
the preset stuff. So there's a rule book that has layouts pre-done so that you can choose which one you're doing, which layout you're doing, and then as you're playing through the game, stuff just sort of, you go into a new room and the encounters pop up, and it's all just done for you. There's not really a DM.
Yeah.
You can just play with your friends. It's and play very quickly without a lot of setup, and it's pretty fun, honestly.
Yeah.
I have thought about getting it. I played it later on when I was a teenager as well. I had a friend that had it.
Oh man, we've never talked about this. I had no idea.
Yeah, I played it. So I
Ah.
used to play it as a teenager, a little bit. Buddy of mine had it. Different buddy had
Mhm.
it, and I've thought about getting this because we're gonna, at some point here, we're gonna transition to the sort of next topic, which is how we're introducing our kids
Mhm.
to fantasy and to the fantasy life. And I've thought about getting this for them. It's a little old for them, and it's funny. Hero Quest's listed as being 14 plus. I
Yeah.
will tell you that I was basically done playing this game by the time I was 14.
Yes.
I was not starting to get into this at 14. I was done with this at 14. So I
Yeah,
think
I'd
their
say
age
it's more
rating
like
on it is pretty
9
silly.
to 14. We
Yeah, I
had
think that's better.
we had a we had a 7-year-old, like a 7 and 8-year-old who would play with us sometimes, but her
Mhm.
name was we put princess in front of her name and she basically got special roles for everything because she was
Oh,
it was very cute.
that's adorable.
It's just so she could play with us and stuff. And but she was still too young for it. It requires, you gotta be able to read and count correctly, and it's.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There is an age cap on it. Where at like 14 or so, you're maybe ready for something a little more like the Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah. I
something more
think by the
advanced.
time you're getting there, yeah, by the time you're getting to 14, yeah, transitioning to like full on AD&D, or I guess just now it's just Dungeons and Dragons. There's no A in front of it, right?
Yeah.
Probably hasn't been for a long time. It shows my age. Um,
Eh,
yeah, fifth edition. I played a bunch of fifth edition in the years after it came out, but I haven't played for a while. I just haven't had a good group where I live.
yeah.
I'm sure I could find one, but
You
yeah.
know, in the next couple of years, you might have a steady Dungeons and Dragons person who might be moving to the Kitsap region.
Well, that would be super.
hmm our kids are all pretty young still. I was curious. So, Gus, what are you doing to kind of like bridge that gap? Because like our kids aren't ready for D&D yet. However, there's like some proto stuff we can do. Like, what do you guys do that's like prepping them?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's two things. So the first thing is they're really creative little kids. I mean, most kids I think are creative. We try to foster creativity in our house. Um, and telling stories. My daughter loves to write books. She'll like, and I mean like by write books, right? I mean like take a few pieces of paper, staple them together, draw a bunch of pictures, write some kid spelling words. Are
Cool.
you familiar with kid spelling?
No.
It's just whatever the kid like sounds out.
hmm
Like it doesn't have to be accurate. It's just like they just can just write whatever
Oh
word
yeah,
they
Ellie
want,
does that. She's
however
like,
they,
"What is
yeah,
that
yeah,
word?" I go, "It's ah yeah yeah." Thanks, Dad.
yeah.
Yeah,
But it's just
yeah.
it's the next step after that. Kid spelling would
Oh,
be more
okay.
along the lines of they're like starting to learn to sound things out. And so
Uh-huh.
now they're trying to spell something like um, you know, let's say they're trying to write the word paper and they might write it
Why? Yeah.
PAYPR,
Right.
just for example, right? And
So she'll do
and
a
so
book
they're
with that. And
she'll do a
like,
book with where everything's written,
uh-huh.
and it's all written like that, and it's adorable. And then she these books that she's writing have unicorns and princesses and
hmm
like food monsters,
Ah, there you go.
you know, um, and all kinds of crazy things, and they're adorable. So just encouraging stuff like that,
Cool.
things she needs to do that, and as she's getting kind of encouraged, right? And
Hmm.
and not being a negative jerk about, well, your spelling's not right, or
Oh
or
yeah.
what is this? Doesn't make any sense. Just being like really encouraging and like, really try to support and foster those kinds of things. I think
Gatekeep the
that's
kind of
really
monsters
important.
she can have. That's a
She can make any kind of monster she wants.
yeah.
Yeah. And then my son loves to tell stories. He doesn't like necessarily like to write stuff. But he really likes to tell
Hmm.
stories. So we did the other day we tried this. Was that not the other day anymore. It's like a couple weeks ago right before our trip. We tried this where I started to do kind of like a role playing game with them, but sans characters and dice and a board
Uh-huh.
and just like role playing in their head. So I was like, okay, well, what's your character? Who's your, what is your character? And they tell me like, one of them she wanted to be the princess, and he wanted
Yeah.
to be like a knight, basically, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then we sort of I was introducing that sort of, cooperative storytelling kind of
Yeah.
concept, right? Where like, well, no, you're just in control of your character and you're telling me what your character does. And then I'm the DM, so I'm the dungeon master, so I'm telling you what the world is doing,
Yeah.
and you tell me what you want to do, and then I tell you what happens from what you want to do, and then when sort of get that give and take of like what a role playing game is, but without anything that's difficult and being very like easy and like being very kind of forgiving
Yeah.
and a very gentle introduction to it. And they really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. They had a ton of fun. And then the other thing that I've been doing is reading to them.
Hmm.
A lot of reading. We do a lot of reading in our house.
Yeah, I think that's really
Um,
important. Yeah.
my book choice, a lot of what we read often is, kids' books, right?
Hmm.
Children's books. But I've started reading some more serious stuff to them. Um,
Hmm.
they're 7, so they're not really super strong readers yet, right? They can sit down with some Dr. Seuss and work their way through it, right?
Hmm.
Which is kind of where they should be. But in terms of what I'm reading to them at like bedtime, we'll read a little bit, read a chapter or two like in the evening.
Hmm.
And I started reading, so I read The Hobbit to them.
Cool.
And then I've started reading, so I've started where I started. So I've started reading, I read Redwall to them, and I'm
Ah,
currently
cool.
reading some Harry Potter. So, and Harry Potter is something I was never into
Hmm.
because I was like too old for it, kind of like
Yeah.
when it came out. Like I think I was a few years too old for it.
Same. Yeah. I still read
Yeah,
them, but I wasn't. Yeah, definitely. But
I
just
read a
like,
couple of them, but I was never
yeah.
into it, and I never finished the whole thing. People who were just a few years younger than me were like
Hmm.
really into it,
Really into it. Yeah.
like really into it, right?
Like,
They were like aging with the characters
yeah.
as right.
Where it was like a lifestyle where you'd give like your age and your sign and then your house. Like, I'm a
Yeah,
Taurus, I'm a Hufflepuff. Yeah. Yeah, I missed that also. That was that my
yeah,
brothers are about that age. My brothers had big setups like that. And
yeah.
it's funny though, my kid um did just what I did. I was like I tried to do what you actually I tried to give The Hobbit a chance. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like The Hobbit when I was a kid. No one read The Hobbit to me. So I found like the illustrated Hobbit,
Oh
really
yeah,
beautiful book, and I was like,
kids
Ellie,
loved that. The illustrations.
my
Oh
kid
my
was like,
god.
blah. She's no. I tried, man. I was reading it. She's like, this is stupid. She didn't say
Yeah.
that, but that
Oh my
was what
god.
her. So
Yeah.
I think she might have gotten my Tolkien. It's not dislike for Tolkien, but he just never it never got
Yeah.
me. I can
You got to
listen
do
to it.
voices for all the characters, though. Do you do voices for all the characters?
That's what I was gonna say. The only way I could stomach reading was to listen, and it was listening to the guy who played Gollum read The Lord of the Rings because he does all the voices
Yeah.
and they're excellent.
Hmm.
I'm even listening to Silmarillion now, but
Oh god,
it's read
I
by the
haven't.
same guy.
Yeah, I haven't read the Silmarillion. We have a copy. I haven't read it since I was a teenager,
Uh,
and when I was a teenager, I had a hard time with it.
it's tough.
Like
Oh,
I forced my way through it. Like I just like made myself read it because I was like, but I was always like expecting like when is it gonna get good? It never really does.
can I be honest with you? I had an Audible credit
Yeah.
and I needed something to fall asleep to.
It'll put you to sleep.
Yes.
Oh man.
Especially with
Uh
Andy Serkis reading it. He's got this
there
deep,
are
rich
some yeah. Yeah.
Glorfindel and blah,
There are
blah,
some good nuggets in there, I would say. Like the Baron and Luthien story is very nice.
blah. Hmm.
Um it's kind of dry, but it's at least a little interesting. And there's like there's some
Hmm.
pieces in there that are kind of like interesting bits or like temporarily like kind of like, but it's honestly
Yeah.
it's a hard read. And I understand why some people get like obsessed with it because of all the like detail that's there and all the detail that it adds to like Lord of the Rings or whatever. But like
Yeah.
I love Lord of the Rings. I am a huge Lord of the Rings nerd. And like at one point, I think in college, like our friend John and I were like trying to learn the languages,
I
right?
vaguely remember that.
Yeah, it
It's
didn't.
ringing a bell. Nerd.
But
I'm just kidding. It's a pot.
even for me, the Silmarillion is just too dry and too
Yeah.
boring. And I appreciate that somebody else can get super into it, but I cannot.
Dude, maybe just gotta listen to Andy Serkis do it. He's got it. But
Yeah.
that brings up an interesting point though. I think I taste varies from person to person, and if you have kids, you know that your kids have taste
Hmm.
for things, and they're constantly evolving. I think your boy and my kiddo are very similar. My kid loves the spoken word. She doesn't want to write
Hmm.
stuff down. She wants to tell stories, and so we do the same thing. And I always found monsters to be a wonderful way not only to like destigmatize monsters as a scary thing,
Hmm.
but it's a wonderful way to like the first things we did. And this comes from my dad, man. He did this thing like called hand monsters, where he'd turn his hand into a monster on four legs, and
Yeah.
he would go around and he'd make like a sound, and it would like crawl around and do stuff. And from the get-go, like whenever my kiddo started talking about monsters and stuff, I was like, oh well, you got monsters too. Monsters are just like little fantasy elements. And she still calls them her little hand monsters,
Yeah.
and we'll have little plays with them almost. And my kid's obsessed with stuffies. She has way too many kitty stuffies and Care Bears. She's got like 14 Care Bears, but we'll have like campaigns with them. And that's what she'll
Yeah.
do. She'll just pretend, and we'll sit and we'll play, and we'll have like weird stuff going on where they have to save this one guy, but there's an evil wizard, and then there's a plague and stuff like that. And you know how kids go, where they surprise you sometimes with how like brutal and metal they can get. And something we do that is kind of special, we do a thing I call them Bobo stories. Um, we picked up one of those things. It's like where you record stories, and then they have their own little box. It's called a Tony box, I think, and you can put the figurine on top of the box, and whatever story's on there, it'll play. So the kid can choose whatever they do, and they
Mm.
have all kinds of classics on there, but they have a little figurine where you can record your own stories. And so I would tell her these stories, and it started off where I would just tell her, and I'd make them up. And it was practice for me for some of my career stuff. I do a lot of like extemporaneous style speaking. It's a long story, but it was kind of practice for that. And it was also like good quality time. But I'd record these stories. And at first it just started with her and her little friends. They put her in the story. And they'd go throughout our town, and we'd have like a zombie attack, and they had to go to the church and get holy water. But the father had been turned into a zombie, and this and that. And it evolved into Bobo stories, like D&D style things where I am Bobo, and just silly things like the group comes upon a beholder, and Bobo runs the wrong way because he doesn't think too good, and he elbows the beholder in the eye. And it and she has now gotten to the point where she just, man, she off-roads every adventure we have, and she'll start talking, and she's got her own character now. So I'll start telling me, okay, well, Bobo and the gang, and I got Bobo, John, Gus, Mr. Slappy Hands, Mr. Poopy Pants, who's a sentient black dragon poop. Um,
Oh my god.
there's some great lore with that. Basically, a black dragon. came down and ate a whole villager
Oh
full of
no.
magic users. And when he pooped them, it became sentient. Um, poop is really like highbrow right now. Very
Oh
funny.
yeah. No, my daughter's the same way. Toilet
Yeah.
humor is
Yes.
yeah, everything is toilet humor. There's no
Everything,
humor
man.
that's not toilet humor. So
Yeah, it's getting late, huh?
yeah, I gotta get going. I am hungry and tired.
Oh yeah, you're getting into dinner time and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, shoot, man. As always, we could probably go on for longer.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Drams and Dragons.
Maybe it's tea and dragons now. I don't know.
Tea and Dragons. Oh, there will be Drams.
There will be trams. But yeah, there will be more. And yeah, thanks for listening. Do all the liking and subscribing, I suppose. Share it with some friends. If you have anybody who you think would like to hear this, it really does make a difference. Word of mouth is huge.